Should we put a big ass window or roof window?
Yeah. Also, you should talk about your identity problems.
Fuck.
What's the most confusing part of your own identity, either of you? It's a hard one. And I really you gotta think, you know? Like, I don't even know if I know for myself. Well, I kind of know. I definitely know. Yeah, I definitely know. Easy peasy.
Well, why don't you?
Okay. So for the longest time, like, I was really confused whether or not I was like trans, and I don't think that's like. I know Karina knows this. I think I told Mason.
I don't know.
Have I told you about that?
Know.
Oh, well, I don't know. I've had like I think what at the time I thought was dysphoria. And I think to an extent it could have been defined under that umbrella of dysphoria. But I think and I really don't want to like sound like I'm delegitimizing other trans like voices and feelings. I just personally for myself, I realized that what I was doing was I was taking a thing and putting it onto my discomfort, because it made me feel like, oh, like, you know, this makes sense. I'm uncomfortable because I'm not what I'm supposed to be. But then, you know, and I played with it, right? Like I've cross-dressed, I've done makeup, I'm a pretty like feminine guy, I would say, like in some circumstances, like fucking, I don't know, you can attest to that, Mason.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I was like, and there were certain experiences throughout my my development as a like through puberty and shit that really made me question a lot of things. And so like when I was in, I can't remember exactly what happened. It was like I think it was like a sexual experience where I was a lot more submissive than I'd normally been, and I kind of like put that together with like the experiences from my childhood and like growing up in my like in puberty, and I was like, oh, like, you know, like I traced the steps and I was like, huh, that makes sense. Like, you know, like in high school I did some cross-dressing and like there was a lot of like questioning about my own identity, and so like maybe it makes sense that like, you know, I've had so much anxiety and I'm so uncomfortable and depressed all the time because of essentially what is dysphoria, you know, and like I'm uncomfortable with my body and with what I am. And
that makes sense as like a default,
yeah,
or
yeah, and I think
idea.
it did make sense for a long time, but I was so like it's just a lot of stuff to work through, and I'm really glad that I gave myself the time to really think about it, because I think what I realized is that like there's part of me that I wasn't allowing myself to be, right? And I think that like Mason, you firsthand have seen how when you very first met me, I didn't really embody what I wanted to be entirely. And as I've grown up and as I've matured and as I've become more comfortable with myself, I realized that like, you know, I am a man and that's what I am, but like I can be a very effeminate man and still be myself, right? And I'm not saying there's trans people who like this is their reality, like I'm not saying like trans, like male to female trans people, like this is always the case. I don't think it is at all. But in my personal case, I think that I recognize that that what I was labeling as dysphoria was other mental problems and was an ignorance to my own identity. And so once I did the work and I really went through the struggle and the life experience to understand like who I am at my core, I realized that it wasn't related to my gender, or to like who I was like socially, and was instead like deeply intertwined with my insecurities and with the things that I wanted to be but I wasn't. And so when I started to just be like, fuck it, like I'm gonna do what I want, I'm gonna act how I want, and as long as I'm not hurting anyone else, then who cares, right? And so I detangled a lot of my own anxiety, and I detangled a lot of my own problems with what I was, and now I exist in this in my body and in spaces in pretty much throughout my entire life without that crippling anxiety and depression right now, at least. You know, I mean, we're all changing, and so I feel comfortable in like the identity that I have. But I very much sympathize with someone who is genuinely trans, because I think that experience would be so like jarring and difficult to grapple with, because I can imagine, you know, like I had like a little bit of a peek into what that can be like, but then to like experience like a life where that's not accepted, or where it's like not, where it's considered false, or even just to yourself doubt it so deeply because you don't really like. There was parts of me that, like, you know, for the longest time, like from a very young age, like I thought maybe, you know, and that maybe is terrifying. I don't think people really acknowledge how scary it is to have this like intuition of yourself that maybe you're not what you've been your entire life. Like that is absolutely terrifying. Like everything you know has to change in order for you to become what you actually are, and that is like super uncomfy. And I think to say that, like, I don't know, I'm not gonna make any like strawman arguments against it, but yeah, that's the thing that like for me was the biggest like identity crisis that is still, I wouldn't say is like super ambiguous. Like I guess like the question I asked is like, what is the most like, you know, upsetting or like still unknown part of your identity? And I think for me, like,
confusing.
I wouldn't say that it's confusing anymore for me, but I think it's still like more to explore for me. And that's like as I've only been comfortable with myself how I am for like the last year, and so I'm still exploring what that means for me. Yeah. All right, who's next? Who can top that?
That seems like a lot to fucking grapple with. Like, and overall, that must have been a fucking journey.
Yeah, man.
So yeah, I grew up in a very Mexican household. My parents are immigrants, Salvadoran Mexican. Food is different, right? But also living, I mean, I learned English through fucking people who I grew up with in my neighborhood, like literal people in front of me, in front of my house, at sleepovers and everything. So I always had this like embarrassment for being Mexican. I didn't like it because I felt like no one else would understand. So I tried to like just suppress that as much as I could. I just didn't like the fact that there were so many different things about my parents that white parents weren't. And it's just like internal like racism. Yeah, it's like, I don't know. So like when I went home days, I just thought about like what it would be like if Drake were here. And a part of me was like, no, I don't like that. I don't like that because you wouldn't understand. Like, I feel like Drake wouldn't understand.
He's too whitewashed for sure. I agree.
Damn. He wouldn't understand like the things that my parents would say, or like, because it's just a different fucking culture. And I have no other way to like explain that other than it's just a different reality. And I don't know, it's just like I really wish, like I really do fucking hope one day that Drake and I can just like go to like some very Mexican party and dance and have fun without me feeling like uncomfortable, because I think that's where a lot of that comes from. Just I feel very uncomfortable with the fact that Drake doesn't really understand this like
lifestyles other than his own.
Yeah, well,
that was more of a shot, but
yeah. I don't know if it's that, but like I feel like because I have such disdain for my mom, sometimes my dad, that I feel like I can never really like appreciate where I came from. And so that's why.
Shit.
But I speak Spanish. I like that. I like that.
Yeah, that's always cool. So you're saying you're confused on whether or not you're proud or embarrassed?
Kind of. Yeah, I mean, I'd say for the most part, I'm proud. Like, I'm not that, like, edgy 13-year-old that was just, like, I did that I was white. I just wanted to be fucking white.
That's crazy.
I think a lot
I
of
wonder.
other people
of-
agree with that. Like, pretty
Really?
sure. Oh, yeah. 100%.
Why though? Like, oh, just because of the reasons you explained, or?
I mean, you know, you grow up in a white culture, and it has all the things that it's like portrayed in such a positive way, you know? Like, in my mind, I was like, I associated being a minority with being poor, and being white with being like better off in life. There's so much internalized racism and external racism in Latin culture.
Hold on one second.